Some people were wondering about astrology, whether there's any science behind astrology, other than, of course, the spiritual basis for astrology, whether science supports it or not. Now, I wouldn't want to get into an argument over the spiritual basis of astrology. I mean, that's sort of a useless argument. It's like arguing over whether God exists. But in terms of the scientific basis, in some areas there is science to prove that astronomical phenomena affects life on Earth. Now, that doesn't mean that that supports the way the different systems of astrology work. But what it does show us is that the planets, quote unquote planets, do have a profound impact on our lives, an influence. For example, take the three centers of the birth chart in Vedic astrology. Now, these centers, the lagnas, are they're points that are used to construct the astrological houses, the 12 houses, or however many houses are made for the birth chart. That is made, of course, at birth. Now, these three centers, the lagnas, are the ascendant, the moon, and the sun. The ascendant is, of course, is the fastest moving of these centers. The ascendant is based on the path of the sun and the planets, known as the ecliptic, and the horizon. It's the point on the eastern horizon where the ecliptic, the path of the planets, intersects with the horizon, the eastern horizon. And that's they use this point on the ecliptic to form the astrological houses. Now, this ascendant is governed by the rotation of the Earth on its axis, the daily rotation of the Earth, which gives us the days and the nights. Now, obviously, that rotation has a major impact on the lives of humans and all other life forms on Earth. You know, we schedule our days based on the 24-hour rotation of the Earth. We tend to sleep at night. And that's not just artificial. There's a biological basis for that. You know, our bodies are programmed, in a sense, to sleep at night. It's known as the biorhythms, the circadian rhythms, which humans have and animals have. So you could work at night. You can work the graveyard shift, but you pay a price for that because our bodies are, to some extent, hardwired to sleep at night. While some animals, they actually sleep in the day, but either way, the daily motion, the rotation of the Earth, which causes the stars to appear to orbit the Earth, it's actually just the Earth spinning on its own axis. It's tilted and it's spinning around, and it looks like the skies, the stars are orbiting around our planet. And that's what causes the day to night, because the sun will, you'll face it for half the day and the other half you're facing away from it. So, obviously that the ascendant has a great, noticeable impact on our lives. Now the moon, the Chandra Lagna, that's another center that you can form the birth chart with. And the moon, obviously, we have the lunar calendar, the lunar months, which have been used since primitive times. There's evidence that it's been used far, far back. and we use it. The moon. We know the effects it has on our Earth, and that's why we constructed lunar calendars. Because, for example, the moon governs the ocean tides, the high tide, the low tide. They all correlate with the phases and the position of the moon. And there's many other things that, well, for example, the menstrual cycle is also correlates with the moon. And there's a lot of other things, a lot of other biological cycles that have that are directly related to the moon. And then the sun, Surya, that's another center that can be used to construct a birth chart. It's more rarely used in Indian astrology, except mainly it's used for health purposes, and the sun is also used for the yearly, annual solar return chart. But the sun, well, it creates the seasons, winter, fall, or the rainy season. If you're in the tropical areas, the dry season, the rainy season. In temperate areas, you have the 4 seasons. And, the sun, that's what creates life on Earth, so no one can deny its influence. Now, again, that doesn't mean that the astrological explanations and for its influence are correct, or the significations that it gives the sun are necessarily correct. But you can't argue that the sun doesn't have an influence on this planet. It emits radiation, light, heat, solar flares. There are all types of cycles involving the sun which influence our Earth. And the mating seasons of animals, the growing seasons, those are all impacted by the sun. And there are some animals that actually spawn. Well, for example, the Pololo sea worms of Indonesia and the Pacific. They use all 3 of those cycles. The daily rotation of the Earth, because they always spawn at nighttime. And they use the lunar cycle because they always spawn during the waning of the moon. And there are a lot of people in those areas that have complex systems of calculating the spawning season of these sea worms, because they're a part of their livelihood. So they use the daily rotation of the Earth, the lunar cycles, the waning moon, and also the solar seasons. Their spawning cycles always happen during a certain part of the solar year. So, in these areas, you can't deny the astronomical influence on life on Earth. Now, when it gets more toward, for example, Western astrology or Vedic astrology, then it becomes the questions of how can you predict when a person who are they going to marry, or that's a lot more controversial. There's no doubt about it. There was a study on what they call the Mars effect, which tried to show that depending on the position of Mars, the planet Mars in a person's chart, if it was in the first house near the ascendant, or the 10th house near the midheaven, the top of the sky, that you would have a greater chance of being a sports champion. It's sort of a controversial study, but it's one of a number of studies which has attempted to examine, the more specific aspects of astrology. But I just thought I'd give my opinion on that, because it's, some people say, is there any scientific basis or support for astrology? And there is, but, it's also by its own declaration, a spiritual type of system. but it combines both. It combines both, and a lot more research would be needed to confirm one way or another some of the tenets of the astrological systems we use today. Okay, that's it.